If you've ever been told to work on your communication skills, you already know the standard diagnosis. Read more, watch your body language, slow down, make eye contact, get to the point faster. Maybe some of it even helped, a little, for a while. But if you're still standing outside conversations the way you might stand outside a language you almost speak, understanding everything, producing almost nothing, here's the actual problem, and it isn't confidence. Your brain finishes thinking on a different schedule than conversation runs on. That's the whole hidden reason, in one sentence. What it actually means, and what to do about it, takes a little longer to unpack, but that's the shape of it. You've read the advice. You've rehearsed it in your head, on the walk home, after a conversation you wish had gone differently. None of that is the behavior of someone who doesn't care about being understood. It's the behavior of someone whose actual difficulty was never where everyone assumed it was. Here is the specific shape of it. It isn't that you have nothing to say. It's that the thing you want to say is still forming while everyone else has already moved 3 exchanges ahead. Picture it directly. 6 people around a dinner table, someone finishes a story, and you already have the exact right thing to add. A detail, a connection, the observation that would have landed. By the time there's an opening, the table has moved on to something else. Or a meeting, where you're still quietly checking that your idea is actually correct, and someone else says a rougher version of it out loud first, and gets the credit for having said anything at all. You feel the sentence arrive late, fully built, sometimes better than what you'd have said in the moment, except the moment is gone, and saying it now feels like reopening a door someone already closed, so you file it away, again. And underneath that, a specific fear starts to calcify. That you are somehow too slow for real time and too much once you finally get going. Not lazy, not shy, exactly, though it can look like shyness from the outside. Not unintelligent, if anything the opposite, since the sentence you were building was usually the more precise one. Something else, something without a clean, single-word label, which is part of why it's so hard to explain to people who've never lived inside it. Most advice about communication is built for a specific kind of mind. One that generates language at close to the same speed it generates thought. For that mind, just speak up is genuinely useful, because the bottleneck really is confidence or habit. But if your thinking and your speaking run on different clocks, that same advice doesn't fail because you didn't try hard enough. It fails because it was never diagnosing your actual mechanism. You weren't given the wrong instructions because someone was careless. You were given instructions written for an average case, and your case runs on a different rhythm. That isn't a flaw in you. It's closer to being left-handed and handed a pair of right-handed scissors for 20 years, then told the problem is your grip. Here's what's actually happening, and it's more specific than a different rhythm. Communication isn't one skill. It's 2 separate processes stacked on top of each other, and almost nobody separates them. The first is the thinking layer, forming an idea, checking it against what you actually mean, refining it until it's accurate. The second is the translation layer, converting that finished idea into real-time speech, on someone else's schedule, without the chance to revise it once it leaves your mouth. Most people's thinking layer and translation layer run at nearly the same speed, so they experience communication as one smooth action. If your thinking layer runs richer or slower than your translation layer can keep up with, you experience something that looks like a communication problem, but is actually a scheduling conflict between 2 systems that were never built to move at the same pace. Picture a translator working a live broadcast, fluent, precise, completely in command of the material, but only ever as fast as the booth allows. Nobody watching that broadcast would conclude the translator doesn't understand the language. Here's the first mechanism worth naming. You've had the experience of losing an exchange in the room and then winning it perfectly an hour later, alone, in the shower, with no clock running at all. That's not a coincidence, and it's not proof you're slow. Producing precise language in real time takes measurably more mental work than recognizing or evaluating language you're only listening to, which is why the good response always seems to show up once the pressure is off. There's a name for that gap: encoding lag. It isn't a flaw in how you evaluate a conversation. It's a mismatch between your production speed and the deadline the conversation gave you. But arriving late isn't the only cost. The room itself runs on a rule you were never told about. Go back to that meeting. The rougher idea won, not because it was better, but because it arrived first. Group conversation runs on an unspoken rule almost nobody examines. It rewards the fastest available response more consistently than it rewards the most accurate one. That's tempo, and it isn't a moral judgment on the room. It's just how turn-taking works when several people are competing for the same short window. If your natural pace runs deliberate rather than fast, you aren't losing to better ideas. You're losing to a format that was never measuring idea quality in the first place. There's a third piece, and it compounds the first two. The moment you notice yourself stumbling, even slightly, part of your attention peels off to monitor it. Now you're running two jobs at once, building the next sentence and grading the sentence you just said. That split is sometimes called dual task interference, and it isn't a personality trait, it's an attention bottleneck. The anxiety doesn't sit outside the conversation, watching from a safe distance. It sits directly inside your translation layer, competing for the exact resources that layer needed to keep up. None of this means the situation is fixed. It means the goal was aimed wrong. The goal was never to become a faster communicator, it's to become a more deliberate one. Every technique that actually helps here is just that principle, applied at a different moment. Applied before a conversation that matters, it looks like externalizing the thinking layer in advance, writing the idea down in 3 rough lines, so the translation layer has less original construction to do live, under pressure, in front of someone. Applied inside a conversation, it looks like treating half a second of silence as a tool instead of an emergency. A pause isn't the translation layer failing. It's the thinking layer finishing its job properly before handing off. Applied the moment you notice a face go blank mid-explanation, it looks like stopping and asking where you lost them, instead of pushing forward and hoping clarity catches up on its own. That single question does more work than any amount of extra explaining. None of these are separate tips to remember. They're the same move, protecting the thinking layer's pace instead of apologizing for it, used at 3 different points in a conversation. Here's what that actually looks like, using the same meeting from earlier. Before, you're turning the idea over, checking it, and by the time it's ready, someone else has already said a rougher version, and the room has moved on. You stay quiet. Again. After, using the same moment, you wrote the idea down the night before, in 3 lines, while you still had time to think without an audience. When the opening comes, you're not building the sentence live anymore. You're reading from work you already did. And if someone talks over the moment anyway, you don't file it away this time. You say, "Can I go back to something for a second?" 5 words, and the door that seemed closed is open again, because you stopped waiting for a door that stays open on its own. Nothing about your thinking changed between the before and the after. What changed is where the thinking happened, ahead of the pressure, instead of during it. So the honest version of the diagnosis is this. You were never bad at communication. You were running a slower, more deliberate process through a format built for the average case, and mistaking the mismatch for a personal defect. There's a second, harder question underneath this one, worth sitting with before anything else. Everything here has been about the cost of thinking too slowly for the room. The opposite problem is just as common, and almost nobody names it. The people who sound confident and fast in every conversation, and why that speed is quietly costing them the one thing they're actually trying to earn.